Adoption. The legal and permanent agreement transferring parental rights and obligations from birth parents to adoptive parents. Don't let anyone tell you there are no Canadian children available for adoption. There are 30,000 children waiting to be adopted in Canada. Sadly, only 2,000 children a year find homes. The rest remain in orphanages and foster care until they turn 19 and age out, living their whole lives with no family to call their own. In Canada, the provinces and territories have their own rules and laws for adoption. Because of family planning and acceptance of single parents, there are not as many children available for adoption in in BC. Even so, from 2015 to 2016, 525 children were adopted. The two types of domestic adoption are public adoption and private adoption. In our province, the two public options are done through the Ministry of Children and Family Development, Children Aid Society, and BC licensed adoption agencies. Because they are government run, these public agencies provide services at no cost, whereas private agencies, although they are licensed by the province and territories, charge for their services. Inter-country adoption used to happen quite often, but now it has to be more controlled because of financial gain. Unfortunately, there will always be those terrible human elements out there that will treat children as commodities, something to buy and sell. The Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption tries to ensure the rights of children in the world. Guatemala, Colombia, and Nepal are countries on the no adoption list because of ethical and illegal deals. China and Ethiopia are trying to keep their children within their own countries and culture. Never think that culture does not matter. If a child is in a transracial adoption, his or her nationality, culture, and customs have to be embraced. Another problem with inter-country adoptions is health issues. This can be very crucial, especially because you may never be able to find out the child's medical history. Adoption is not easy. Prospective parents are vetted rigorously. Even if they are accepted, for some parents the cost is just too much. Some have spent life savings and remortgaged their homes and still not been able to adopt. Then there are families to consider. It is obvious that the child coming into a new family has to be taken care of. But we must also remember the siblings. They also have to adjust. They also have to have an adjustment period. Sometimes adoption happens overnight, so there's not a lot of time to prepare for change. There could be acting out on both parties that only patience and understanding can fix. Another very important consideration in adoption is how much interaction will be allowed between the adoptive and birth families. Some have total open adoption agreements where both families exchange photos, phone calls, and visits. Then they even know each other's last names and they know where they live. Some agreements are semi-open, where information and photos are exchanged through another person. Neither family knows any personal information about each other. Finally, there are the closed adoption, where confidentiality is practiced and there is absolutely no contact between families. As an educator, your job is to work closely with the parents for the betterment of the child. If you have an adoptive child in your group, be sure to talk about adoptive families and have children's books that are related to the child's situation. Remember, you interact with the child every day and need to assess the behavior and accomplishments. and be sure to share it with their parents. If a child does not react to a situation as you expect, remember some of their past may not be known. A past that could have been very traumatic. If there is a transracial or children from another country, you should be ready to share their heritage. Unfortunately, you also have to deal with racism and prejudice. As educators, we must also remember that activities may be sensitive, especially if baby photos or past history is involved. Everyone and every family are unique. This is so true, especially true for adoptive families. Added to that, however, is the fact that each one of these children have their own stories and their own journeys.
In 1969, we had two little boys that were ours, but the family just didn't feel complete. So my husband and I decided we'd adopt. And so we started telling the little boys this story about living in Coombs and well, one of them had said that they wanted a sister. So anyways, we started talking about little girls and adopting and explained what adoption meant to them, that we would be given a phone call and we would go and we'd see this little baby and be able to bring it home. So this did happen. We put in for adoption, and about 4 months later we got a phone call that there had been a baby born in Vancouver at Grace Hospital, and this was in June, and that they would phone us back in 5 days after the mother had been given her chance to keep the child. And so anyways, we started packing. The kids had fun. We put the baby's clothes, the little girl's clothes in the suitcase, and the morning that we went over together, we got up bright and early and got on the boat, and the youngest one spilt milk all over himself in the restaurant. Anyways, we got to Vancouver and got to the hospital and walked in and saw this most beautiful little girl. She was 10 days old. She had a curl on the top of her head. It was just adorable. And we, so first thing I said, can I help you get her dressed? Because I was ready to take her home. And they said, well, do you want her? And I said, what? We came over here to get our baby. This is my baby. And the minute we saw her, there was absolutely no difference in the way I felt in my heart for that child as for the ones that were born and laid in my arms after they had been born. There was absolutely no difference at all in your feeling for that child. And we got her dressed, and I said, you know something about, it really felt weird to me, I said to the nurse, that you asked me if I wanted her. And she said, we have to. She says, see that little boy next door to her, who was 10 days old as well? She said the parents came and looked at him this morning and said, no, he's too fat, we don't want him.
That's terrible.
And I said, I started to cry. I said, I couldn't believe that anybody could do that. But that's the way it was. So anyways, we took the baby, and after we got her dressed and on the boat, and the kids were sitting there, and they said, oh, she's smiling at us. She's happy to be coming home.
That's wonderful.
So when she got a little bit older, we told her the story about these two little boys and the mommy and daddy that lived in Coombs, and they had a really happy life, but there was one thing missing in their life, and that was a little sister. And so we told them about, told her about going to Vancouver and how much fun we'd had, and then we just continued on the story with what was happening, you know, what had happened as she grew up, and all the little fun stories about her. So adoption never meant a thing to her. It was just, it was just a way of life. It was a matter of, matter of fact that this was the way it was, and
Did your kids ever get like picked on for being?
never,
That's awesome. That's really
never,
good.
yeah, no. We were in Coombs, so
Yeah, yeah, true.
Growing up,
We
I
did-
had a best friend who was actually adopted from Ethiopia. She was adopted when she was 7. The adoption agency actually changed her birth year, so then she was 4, so then she was most likely to get adopted. Luckily, the people who adopted her were wonderful human beings, and they actually knew she was 7, but
Later on,
they
when
adopted
Saganit
her
was
anyway.
12, she went back to Ethiopia to go visit her biological family.
The reason Saganit went up for adoption was because her mother passed away at birth when she was giving birth to Saganit, and her father was never in the picture. Luckily, her grandma stepped in until she was 7, but then it just became too much for her grandmother. She had to take care of all of her siblings and her cousins. Her grandmother had to make a hard decision, a very hard decision, to put somebody up for adoption. She chose Saganit. At the time, Saganit probably was thinking this was the worst thing possible, but now she's grateful. She has family all over the world. She has family in Ethiopia and family in Canada.
I shared this interview and my friend's story because as an educator, it is so important to hear the journeys that both the adoptive parents and the child have taken. The child, the parents, and the educator are like threads weaving in and out to make a whole.